feminism ruins hot wings, amputees, and actors, and a nice talk with Charlie Kirk about American diplomacy. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and welcome to the show. As always, I am joined by Katie Petrick of The Healthy Republic for the Countdown. Katie, where do we begin this week?
Well, this week we have a ton of stuff happening, but obviously the mainstream media has been focusing a lot on President Trump's meeting in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin. So I just wanted to, I guess at the outset, get your opinion on what happened. Well,
as you know, we're going to be talking to Charlie Kirk coming up later in the show about the foreign ministry and Trump's travels overseas. I will simply say at the outset here that I think it's amazing that the biggest problem Trump has is not with Vladimir Putin, it's not with Kim Jong-un. They've both at least demonstrated a willingness to talk to him, a willingness to listen to him. The big problem he's got is with the American media and Democrat politicians. So you can get all bent out of shape. He flew over to Russia and met with Putin. You can get all bent out of shape I thought it was wonderful that he lectured Theresa May in her own country about getting out of Brexit like the people wanted. But the real antagonists here, the most viscerally uncooperative people in the world today, are American progressives and Democrats. So stay tuned for the rest of the show. We'll talk a lot more about this with Charlie.
All right, look forward to it. Well, I guess back home, though, we have a lot of different stories happening. Media is going crazy as usual. But actually, we're going to go back over to Germany, and we are going to talk about a story from a TEDx speaker. Her name is Miriam Heine from the University of Würzburg, and she claims that pedophilia is a natural sexual orientation, just like heterosexuality, and that no one chooses to be a pedophile, no one can cease being one. So she did this TED Talk, and TED Talks, in case you don't know what they are, basically experts in any given field on a topic give a nice speech to people, and they put them out on YouTube so everyone can listen. And she actually had a group of people listen to this. I think it was like a 15-20-minute lecture, and I listened to part of it, and it's...
Jonas has a secret which he thinks he cannot share with anyone, not even with his best friend or with his parents. He's just too afraid of anger, rejection, and repulsion. Jonas knows that he has to suppress his sexual drive for his entire life. And he also knows that there will never be a loving and fulfilling partnership that he can enter. Because Jonas is a pedophile. He's only attracted to female children between the ages of 6 and 12 years.
You have to watch it yourself and just try to understand what she's saying, because it's just insane.
I listened to it too. It's a disaster. TED Talks 5 years ago were really the gold standard of apolitical, really important conversations. Like everything else the Democrat media gets it, the progressive media gets its hand on. Now TED Talks are shockingly politically correct, one-sidedly political, and annoying. And this is a classic example. In fact, the first bumper of stories we're going to do today all deal with this. Things that we warned you were happening. What was going to happen if we allowed progressives to define gender, to define race, to define culture the way they wanted to? You were not going to be able to turn that spigot off. And here's a classic example. So we heard 10, 15 years ago when the whole gay marriage movement was ramping up, we heard that we had to allow gay marriage, homosexual marriage, because gender is, sexual preference is biological, right? No one's born that way. No one has a choice, I should say. It's chemical, it's a brain thing. Now, of course, now gay marriage is legitimized. You never hear them talk about that anymore, because if you talked about the idea that for something to be serious or to be taken serious and legitimate, it has to have a biological origin, that would not include transgenderism. So now, conveniently, when it comes to male or female, the science doesn't matter anymore. And taking it to the farthest extreme here. So you've got actual advocates now, and they've always been around. Remember NAMBLA in the 1980s and 90s, the National Man-Boy Love Association? Now you've got so-called academics making the argument. If you are a pedophile, if you're attracted to underage children, and her case study is a 19-year-old boy who's attracted to girls between the ages of 6.
It's like 6 and 12.
6 and 12.
Someone named Jonas.
Jonas.
He's a victim. And
yeah, he's a victim.
We shouldn't like we can't engage, like he can't engage in his sexual preferences, and we're supposed to feel so bad for him.
So you got girls between the ages of 6 and 12-year-old, basically prepubescent girls that this 19-year-old is attracted to, and the entire focus of this professor's talk was what a victim he was, because he's born a pedophile. And and the word pedophile is highly judgmental. We got to come up with an alternative word for it. This is exactly what they did with transgenderism. It's exactly what they did with homosexuality. And none of this has anything to do, Katie, with the right of an adult man to have sex with little children. What this is about, when you really go around about this, what this is the mainstreaming of sexual capacity for people of all ages. What they're doing here is not necessarily trying to argue it's okay for adult men to have sex with little kids. What they're getting around about here is the idea that little children as young as 5 and 6 years old, younger, should be able to have sex with whoever they want. If in their own childlike ways they don't resist the sex or don't vocalize some kind of a stop, then this should be allowed too. Why are we taking away from 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds their right to sexual control of their own bodies? That's why we're teaching 5 and 4 and 6-year-olds in preschool, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. We're introducing highly sexualized topics into their elementary school classes now. What we're really after here is autonomizing sex for little kids. And that should creep everybody out. It doesn't creep the left out, but this is predictable. When we refuse to draw the line anywhere with regards to these progressive initiatives, you're going to give them an inch, they're going to take miles and miles and miles.
Yes, they are. Okay, well, we're going to head over to South Africa now, because a bizarre so-called study came out arguing that fathers in the home should not be seen as being normal. So having your father in the home should not be seen as being normal. The state of South Africa's Fathers 2018 report declared that, quote, a father living with his biological children on a daily basis should not be seen as a norm to which all families should aspire, since it is simply not feasible or desirable in all cases. Now, this study was done by the Sonka Gender Justice, and it says it right there. They advocate for working together to resist the patriarchy, and they advocate for gender justice and all this goofy stuff. And they say in South Africa that there are all sorts of fathers. There's young fathers, old fathers, straight fathers, gay fathers, this whole list.
Female fathers.
They didn't specify, but I'm sure that they get to that one. So.
But this is exactly a story like the first one, where you give them an inch, they're going to take miles and miles. We started by arguing that single-parent motherhood was a noble thing, right? Young girls getting pregnant, having babies without fathers, that went from being a burden to being a blessing, right? And the feminists have got involved with this. Absent fathers now were absent good fathers, right? The state steps in, the huge federal bureaucracy steps in and becomes surrogate parents, surrogate fathers for these children, which means simply transferring wealth away from people to single mothers to raise these kids without any moral background, without any paternal influence, just a transfer of wealth, money from the federal government to single parents, single mothers. And then the feminists get involved, and now you're at what is the logical conclusion here: men aren't even necessary. You know what? If somebody tried to put together a survey or a study that demonstrated that mothers aren't necessary in the home for babies, this would be met with outrage. To suggest that not all women are mothers the same way, to suggest that women aren't needed in the roles of parents, would be viewed as a horrible attack on women's rights to be able to raise their children. But now the logical conclusion, again, of what the left has done by tearing down all boundaries is it is desirable in many instances for fathers not to be in the home. The next thing, all that remains here, the next step in this is going to be to criminalize certain aspects of fatherhood.
Absolutely. So we'll see what happens on that one. Moving even closer to home, here back in the U.S., we have the University of Minnesota saying that they're trying to push a new policy, and they're going to look at it this fall, that may punish people who refuse to use someone's preferred gender pronoun. So at the University of Minnesota, they're basically saying that you can label yourself whatever name you want or whatever gender you want, and it doesn't have to match your legal records. And that if you're in class, you can choose to or to not inform other university members, so your professor or your fellow peers, of your preferred name and preferred gender. You can do this, or you don't have to do it. You can do it in writing, or you can do it verbally. So basically, do whatever you want at this point.
That's key. It's not just your gender pronoun, that whatever pronoun you want to be called, professors will potentially lose their jobs if they misgender you. That's bad enough, but it's names. It's not just your gender, it's your name. Whatever you insist upon being called, Your fellow classmates have to call you that, or they can be expelled. And professors, tenured adult professors with PhDs who don't call you by whatever goofy name you make up or misgender you with using the wrong pronouns. This is first of all, this is a reaction against Jordan Peterson. What this is a way of trying to get around Jordan Peterson's very cogent arguments about why he will not succumb to the speech police, why he's going to say if men and men and women are women, he's going to call them by those pronouns, and there is no way you can come after my speech. He's become a world celebrity for believing that. This is an attack on that.
Well, and the main difference people need to remember is Jordan Peterson's in Canada, and in Canada they don't have the free speech rights that we have here. And so if Americans would just step up and understand that at a public university, because the University of Minnesota is a publicly funded university, you have the right. You cannot control the speech, and they're saying that this is going to be one of the most progressive of all the policies that have already been put out there. And if they somehow magically make this happen, they're just asking for a lawsuit.
By progressive, what we mean is fascist, right? That's what, in the instances, in order to placate a radical minority's desire to control every aspect of your linguistic speech when it comes to them, this is fascism. And here's what's so absurd about this. So I'm a 21-year-old African-American activist kid from inner city Minneapolis, and I'm now at the University of Minnesota.
Are you identifying as that now?
And if I do? And what if I do? What if I
Absolutely.
do insist on being that? You can't tell me no. But because you are what you say you are. But I'm an inner city African-American kid, young man, who's an activist, and I'm in some bald, fat white guy's university class. And I say to that university professor, my name is Mr. N-word. I will be called by you Mr. N-word. Now you got him coming and going, right? Because if the professor says, oh, excuse me, Mr. N-word, he just used the N-word, and you know what the University of Minnesota is going to do to him, right? Now, if he refuses to call that kid Mr. N-word, guess what? Thanks to this stupid policy, he can be fired for that as well. There are endless ways that this is a bad idea. And yet the bureaucrats, the educrats at the University of Minnesota are going to push forward with this because this is what we do. Now that this ties into the first two stories we did. When nobody stands up and challenges the illogic, the lack of science, the complete disappearance of any factual basis for the claims that left-wing academics and journalists and celebrities are making, when nobody stands up and draws a line, you see how absurd this gets, how quickly.
Yeah, and the thing to remain, I mean, you said it, but to really point out here is that professors can lose their jobs.
That's right.
And students can be expelled. They are actually saying that if it gets to that point, they would actually expel students.
Yeah, if you are somebody, and I would be this person, who conscientiously will not call somebody a derogatory name or a name that is something goofy and stupid, I'm not gonna call you Your Highness. I'm not gonna do it. And if you as far as the gender pronouns go as well, right? As Jordan Peterson points out, my right to speak and use the language as I see fit absolutely trumps your right to monitor how I distribute pronouns. If that's the case, then, like you said, the stakes are really, really high here. It is a lawsuit that's going to come chugging down the road, but it's not going to stop them. And the first three stories we've talked about here all make the same point. How obscene and absurd has this radically unchecked progressivism become? They're coming after your sexual rights. They're sexualizing your little children. They're going to determine what you can and can't say to people. This is fascist Orwellian stuff, and yet it's ironic that the progressive left always uses fascist to describe their enemies.
Well, like Phoebe Buffay, I would like to now be called Princess Consuela Banana Hammock from now on.
Oh, there you go. You can call yourself that all you want.
All right, well, that's what you have to call me.
Yes.
Okay, so moving on to a bunch of feminist activists who are confused, but I repeat myself. We have Kimberly Johnson, who's a feminist contributor to HuffPost, and she's a spokeswoman for the national advocacy group We Are Woman. She was slammed for questioning this tweet that she put out. She questioned why a black person would not embrace progressive politics, and she said she was very confused after seeing a black man with a pro-NRA and Tea Party bumper sticker. She deleted this tweet, but it said, out on the road the other day, I saw an affluent black man driving a BMW with two bumper stickers. One was pro-NRA, and the other one was a Tea Party sticker that read, "Don't tread on me." This left me very confused.
Yeah, it left you confused, you social justice nitwit, because you're a racist, right? The very thing you accuse the rest of us of seeing African-American people and suddenly changing our behavior, clutching our purses a little closer, driving our cabs past them, leaving them on the street corner. That's exactly the kind of stereotypical stupid behavior you're engaging in, Mrs. Woke Feminist. In other words, when you see blacks, you see Democrats, progressives, you see Obama supporters, to actually see an independently minded African-American driving a nice expensive car, by the way. Were you bothered by that? When I see an African-American driving a Cadillac, if somebody said that to you, right? Some white bread colleague of yours said, I saw an African-American driving a Cadillac today. Wonder how that happened. You'd call him a racist. But you turn around and do the exact same thing about your politics. You're a bigot, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You engage in generalizations. You reduce people to their skin color. You are not woke. You're a joke. A joke. How's that? Did I just appropriate rap? Did I just rap? You ain't woke. You a joke.
No. Moving on. We are not even. Okay. We're going to go to Australia because they are woke down under. Bridgette Delaney, she is a columnist for The Guardian in Australia, and she has the best/worst headline ever. It says, I stopped going to the gym because of Trump. Now I can't open jars. This woman is blaming her inability to open pickle jars because Donald Trump was elected. And basically what happened is she used to go to the gym, and her gym owner or coach said, hey, if Trump wins, you have to push this sled, which is a piece of fitness equipment. Anyway, she was so distraught after Trump won. When she went into the gym, she said, just load the bleeping sled, and she pushed the sled, and afterward she went to this restaurant alone. It was silent, she said. It seemed like the perfect place to welcome the end of the global liberal order. And what new political order has been born tonight? It's basically a diary entry she's putting. But because of this, she couldn't go to the gym, and then she laments that she can't open pickle jars anymore.
Yeah, so again, like our former feminist moron, you're a moron too, because the assumptions you make about gender and sex are just so patently absurd, right? That as a woman, you can't open a pickle jar unless you go to the gym. First of all, why call them gyms? That seems to be masculine, doesn't it? Instead of calling them gyms, let's call them gems, right? Gemmas instead of gymnasiums. So the stupidity of this is astounding. He's not your president, moron. He is not your president. He is not the president of the liberal state of Australia. You are just distraught that Barack Obama, who couldn't open a pickle jar if he had Michelle's burly arms behind him, no longer the president of the free world, the leader of the free world. So get over yourself. So I love this. I love how when a strong man is elected president in some other country, you immediately surrender your rights to autonomy, right? Trump didn't take away your right to go to the gym. You took it away from yourself. Trump didn't take away or enforce weakness on you. You chose weakness in response to Donald Trump. So in other words, Donald Trump becomes president and you quit, right? That is, my friends, winning.
She can't.
Huge winning.
She can't even. Okay, well, we also have another feminist scholar, and this time, this scholar, we're going from the gym to food. She's slamming a hot wing eating show for inequitable gender hierarchies. So her name is Emily J.H. Contour. I don't even know. She's from the University of Tulsa, and her whole research focus is on food and gender. Her research examines how media representations of food, cooking, and dieting construct and negotiate masculinities in our current historical moment.
The fact that you have professorships reserved for people who do work in food and gender tells you why American and Western universities have become a complete and utter joke. Not places of serious learning, not places outside of science departments, not places that you can send your kids to with a straight face, paying how many tens of thousands of dollars at the University of Tulsa to send your kids there to learn about gender and food. And what, pray tell, is the argument that makes eating hot wings sexist?
Yeah, so the show she specifically looked at is a YouTube show called Hot Ones. And basically the host and a celebrity sit down, they put varying degrees of hot sauces on chicken wings, and they kind of have an interview back and forth. Well, she laments that in 3 years of this YouTube show, only 11 women have been on the show to eat the hot wings. And so it piqued her academic interest. She says the problem is gender binaries, which, quote, create power hierarchies by feminizing dainty, light, and sweet flavors in foods eaten in small portions with restraint. Because the hot wings are too masculine for her, she can't even.
Yeah, the implication is that by it's like math, right? If you Put a lot of unqualified women in math jobs, everyone's going to immediately start to think, hey, women can do math. If you put a bunch of hot wings in front of women and have them eat spicy food, more people will recognize that women can eat spicy food. In other words, it's a complete academic waste of time. And it's just bitterness, right? I mean, so maybe to balance it out, you got to have your male guests eat the mild wings, right? The boring, bland ones. And just have your female guests eat the spicy ones.
Well, yeah, and what was interesting, the episode of it that I watched was Natalie Portman, and she downed those wings like it was nobody's business.
Right. So, but you know, whenever you actually do have women on who meet the challenge, there's just not enough of them. Yeah. Way too much time. Those, again, the first 3 articles that we dealt with today show you exactly how far liberals will go if common sense doesn't stop them, and where is the common sense in our world. And the second one show you how academic feminism is behind much of what we see spilling over into the proper culture.
Well, we know we don't have common sense over in Hollyweird, but we have a lot of stories coming out of there. Rob Reiner, who previously was known as Meathead, or still could be known as Meathead, he released a anti-Iraq war protest film, and in its debut weekend, it made a whole $41,000.
They're dialing up the rhetoric on Iraq. Let's see if we can nail them down, okay? Let's get to work.
We're working on a theory that the administration has already decided to go to war and is now focused on how to justify it.
It's not a theory.
We're working on something important. That's why I'm here, to make you an offer.
It's Joe Galloway.
Wow.
And even walks like he has a Bronze Star.
What do you want to know?
Everything the administration doesn't want us to know.
A secret war planning group has been set up in the building where I work.
And which building is that?
The one with 5 sides.
And so it has a 28% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And here's the best part. I found the review from the Washington Post, of all places. They even slammed it with a 1.5 out of 4 stars. And they said, what should unfold like a contemporary thriller instead becomes a lecture.
Gee, liberals unable to tell stories, only able to lecture. Go color me crazy. First of all, we got to stop calling him Meathead because he's a liberal progressive male, which means the whole tarring him with the meat. So we're going to call him Tofu Head. All right?
Tofu.
From now on, he will be Tofu Head. Tofu Head, right? This is like his 6th bomb.
Sponge.
This is his 6th bomb movie in a row. He's lost the ability to tell stories, Rob Reiner. Why? Because he has become an ideologue. This is what's happening to all the major leftist celebrities. They're losing their artistic spirit. Here's the thing, Hollywood. Let me clue you into something. Once you become hyper-politicized, you are no longer able to produce art. It's just the way that it is. You may not like it. You may think you can be different. You may think that you're somehow smarter than the rest of us and can pull it off. But nowhere in history do you really see this panning out. That the more hyper-compulsive about politics you become, the more you become and this could be true for conservative artists too, right? If they become too political. But if politics is what dominates you, you lose the gift of storytelling because you can't relate to every man anymore. You can't relate to all of us. You can only relate to people who share your radical political views. And so it's not just Tofu Head, right, whose movie is a complete and utter disaster. We've got, who else? What's our second story?
Well, we have Scarlett Johansson, who she was slammed because she accepted a role as a transgender man. It's supposed to be called Rub and Tug, this movie, and so she was set to play this transgender man, Dante Tex Gill, who owned a massage parlor in Pittsburgh's underground sex industry in the 1970s. She immediately got flack back from Twitter saying that she's being selfish and she can't represent us, the transgender community. So because Scarlett Johansson herself is not a transgender man, she's unfit to play the role. And so after a week of this basically Twitter trolling, she said, you're right, and she backed out of the role.
Yeah, so Scarlett Johansson, and we'll see her again in our Dunce of the Day segment, she just opened a very dangerous door. She is an actress. Everything she does, I guarantee you, she is not any of the characters that she's played. With all due respect to Scarlett Johansson, every role she's ever played in a film is not somebody who she is. In other words, by giving in to the transgender mafia, the idea that a non-trans person has no business playing a trans person on screen, you have just undercut your own profession, honey. What you're basically saying is, everybody who acts is being somebody else. Here's a question for you. If now that Scarlett Johansson backed out rather than stand up to these people and say, look, I'm all for the hiring of more transgender actors, but I'm going to make this movie now to draw attention to the plight of transgenders. Rather than do that, she ran away for it. She agreed with the premise of these censorious mobs that I, not being transgender, cannot play it. Here's my question. Is it possible now for a rich person, for an actor to play a rich person or a poor person. If a rich actor is called upon to pay a beggar or a pauper or a homeless man, how can they possibly do that? That's an offense to the lower classes. What can you do? Can a non-athlete play an athlete's role? Should Will Smith have been allowed to play Ali? No, of course not. I mean, this is what you're opening yourself up for, American left. And this goes, again, back to the first series of talking points for this show, right? That when no one checks these premises, when you allow the leftist mobs to tell you what you can and can't do, can and can't say, can and can't think, can and can't act, pretty soon there's nothing left to do. You just undercut your own profession.
Well, and here's what exactly happened. Now they're actually saying that because Scarlett Johansson exited from the film, this film may never be made.
That's right.
So now you can't even bring attention to it because they need to have someone, an A-lister, play the lead role to be able to, generate interest. Production companies will not back that. They need to make money. That's what they're due.
And yet production companies were going to back a movie about apparently masturbatory practices in an underground sex institute, right? Starring Scarlett Johansson. So when ScarJo was on board for the rub and tug, maybe 18-year-old boys would have turned out and seen it. Now that you're not going to have ScarJo, there's going to be no transgender movie made at all. Hope you're happy out there, trans mob.
There you go. We have another story that's very similar to this. It's actually from Dwayne Johnson, who's better known as The Rock. He just got criticized now, and it's in light of this Scarlett Johansson story. His latest movie is called Skyscraper, and he plays a man with he has an amputated leg. And so actress Katie Sullivan, who's a Paralympian and a double above-the-knee amputee from birth, wrote in a letter, she actually sent a letter to The Rock and said, "My request is for you to stop saying yes to roles like the one in that movie. While I am thrilled that a film about a kick-ass veteran and father, who is a unilateral below-the-knee amputee, got greenlit in the first place, the problem is this perpetuates the fact that we're not given the agency to tell our own stories." And
there you go. And you thought the Scarlett Johansson character situation was ridiculous. Now look at what that breeds. You've got an amputee person arguing that no people are allowed to play amputee victims on screen unless they're actual amputee victims, right?
Yep.
Right.
And here's the thing. This is the kicker that this Katie Sullivan failed to notice. Johnson's character was actually inspired by a real-life amputee named Jeff Glassbrenner, and I guess he spent a lot of time on set and spent time with The Rock making sure that it's a realistic portrayal. And so when The Rock was doing promotion for Skyscraper, Glassbrenner was there with him on Good Morning America, and they had an Instagram photo, and so it's very much portraying real people and trying to tell these people's stories, but you need to have the actors who can do the acting part.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Now, any non-military actor who plays a military role is guilty of stolen valor by this, right? So whenever Tom Hanks dresses up in camouflage for a movie like
Saving Private
Ryan, he is guilty of stolen valor now, right? Why didn't you find a real Hollywood? And here's the thing, you could never make another war movie again. Back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you could have a guy like Jimmy Stewart who went off and flew fighter planes and then came back. He could do those roles. But given the feckless liberalism and cowardly progressivism of most Hollywood celebrities today, I can't think of a single one of them that spent any time in the military. So you have to stop making military movies, right? And the whole thing is absurd, but it's predictable. You can't now, unless you have an actual amputation, you can't play an amputee. Dustin Hoffman has no business playing Rain Man. An idiot savant, right? A mildly mentally challenged individual who has certain gifts can't do that. Tom Hanks again can't play Forrest Gump, can he? Right? There was actually an article in the paper that somebody questioned. I think it was the same person who questioned The Rock, that she was bothered by the fact that people like Tom Hanks, who are totally competent mentally, were playing people who weren't, and it just goes on and on and on.
It does. Speaking of going on and on and on, we're out of time for stories, so we're going to get to Dunce of the Day.
Dunce of the Day.
So many good candidates, per usual, every week. But we're going to start off with a good one. 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's back in the news. She's, of course, the one who won her Democratic primary in New York, unseating a 10-term congressman. And so now she's become basically the dream of the left, and they're touting her as the next Democrat.
Che Guevara.
Che Guevara, there you go. And she's claimed herself to be a democratic socialist. And so she went on PBS's firing line and she was interviewed. So now she's in the real firing line here. And she was asked her position on a variety of topics, and she made a comment saying the occupation of Palestine. And when she was asked to clarify this, here's her response.
I think what I meant is like the settlements that are increasing in some of these areas and places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes.
Do you think you can expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue.
Now, before we move on, she was a major in international relations at Boston University.
Yeah, so 28 years old, Democrat, the biggest oxymoron in the history in the world, right? A democratic socialist. That's like saying a freewheeling Nazi, right? It's just the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. But why are we surprised that a millennial, a 28-year-old millennial who got elected because people of New York only vote for the farthest left candidate? And now the other thing about her is you're watching very left-wing people begin to attack her, right? A number of left-wing figures are basically saying that, who is this woman? Why is she getting so much attention? She's making the rest of us look bad. And it turns out that she lied in her bio, too. She's not Alexandria from the block, right? She was a privileged kid. She led a life of luxury. She went to a major college, right? This is not some broken little ghetto girl. This is a highly privileged, spoiled brat who doesn't know a lot, who was elevated to a position in government now simply because she spouts leftist talking points.
Yeah, we'll see if she actually gets elected. But she went on and she actually showed her economic expertise. And do you know why the current unemployment rate is so low?
Why?
Well, she will tell you. She says, well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs.
Right. So the only reason people are working is they have to work twice.
Yeah, and that's what she said, but she doesn't understand that that's not how it's calculated. You could have 22 jobs, it doesn't matter. That's not how the unemployment rate is calculated. So she's a winner. And don't forget, in addition to international relations, she majored in economics.
She calls herself a socialist. Why would we expect her to understand anything about politics, government, or money?
Exactly.
So in other words, she's probably perfect for New York.
There you go. Second candidate is Sarah Silverman. She claims to be a comedian and actress, but she's now saying that fire and police departments are examples of successful socialism. So she put out this tweet responding to Dan Bongino, who is on a show, saying that socialism is a disaster. And here's her response. And you can attempt to read it for yourself, but it says, "Forgive me, but you are daft. Socialist Democrats are for socialized programs within our democracy, like education and healthcare available for all, making sure all kids have the same opportunities. You don't like socialized programs? Do you like the police department, the fire department?"
Yeah, so police departments and fire departments are socialist entities simply because they're public servants. This shows you how bad it's gotten among progressives. And again, this is the dark-haired, ugly stepsister, twin sister of Kathy Griffin, right? You put them in a room together, except for the bad hair dye on Kathy, you wouldn't be able to tell the two of them apart. But this is how far it's fallen for these so-called comedians, right? She doesn't realize, Sarah Silverman, that public service isn't socialist service. She's got it in her head, as do so many progressives, that to work for the government is to work for socialism. That all government programs are designed to impose socialist control, socialist reach, socialist costs, and socialist outcomes on America. They attribute, that's why they all love Barack Obama. They love government that takes away individual liberties in the name of collectivism. Whether you're talking about Alexandria from the block or you're talking about Sarah Silverman, it's the same goofy thing. So police officers are agents of socialists because they are an organization that serves the public. That's what they think social. That's why all lefties are for socialism. They don't have the vaguest idea what the word means.
All right. Next we have Ariana Grande, who sings some music, I guess. I don't listen to it, so I don't even know what she sings. But her new song is called God is a Woman. And in the song, she says that sex proves that God is a woman. This song is meant to empower women. And she actually spoke out openly about people being in politics. She says that people should speak openly, and that anyone who remains apolitical, she says, it's wild to me. If I'm not going to say it, what's the effing point of being here? Not everyone is going to agree with you, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to shut up and sing my songs. I'm also going to be a human being who cares about other human beings, to be an ally and use my privilege to help educate people.
Yeah, so basically the argument is, if I understand the story correctly, that God is a woman because of sex.
Yes.
Can you explain that to me for a second?
I can't even.
Right. So God is a woman primarily because of sex. Sex proves that God's a woman. Well, again, you just went and outed yourself. What if I, as a man, identify as a woman? Does that mean God looks like me too? And so hashtag shut up. I mean, on all the list of our dunces, I mean, to be completely honest with you, a pop singer.
Is that what she sings?
It's a very low bar. It's a very low bar for the entire. The other ones so far have bothered me much more. I expect very little out of my pop singers.
All right, the next one.
It's like asking Taylor Swift about Trump's diplomacy in Europe. It doesn't make any sense.
All right, Scarlett Johansson. We won't rehash that one, but she's next on the list.
Yeah, before we move off of her, I want to make that point again. Maybe I'm showing you my hand, putting it on the table here. Oh. But Scarlett Johansson, by refusing to play the role that was offered to her, right? A good role, by the way, a juicy role, and siding with the transgenders that no transgender person should be allowed to act a certain role, she just undercut, as I said before, her entire profession, right?
That's true.
Who's our next candidate?
The final candidate is Samantha Bee. She actually just said that she was actually the one who was hurt by the Ivanka Trump comments, and if you remember, she called Ivanka Trump a feckless "see you next Tuesday" about a month ago, and she spoke with Hollywood Reporter recently and said she learned a lesson after this whole incident when advertisers had pulled out for a little bit, but now she has all her advertisers back. And she said the lesson was that, in fact, she was the victim of the outrage machine that guides political discourse. The outrage machine couldn't handle her progressive vocabulary. She says, "It affected me a lot. I've been thinking about it a lot. We had a scheduled vacation around July 4, and it was time of reflection. I do think that being part of the outrage machine is an inevitability now. Maybe I'll be better prepared next time. I think we handled it well, but it was a pretty steep learning curve."
Yeah, so she was a victim of the outrage engine. Honey, you are the engine. When you call Ivanka Trump, when you call her a feckless C-U-N Tuesday, when you use those words, you were the most outrageous person in the room. And that's something. Think about the clown show that is the progressive left. You were the biggest clown in the smallest car when you used that word. And yet you're blaming the outrage machine for punishing you? Really? Seriously? Samantha Bee, you have had untrammeled free speech since you got to this country. You have used this country, because you don't have it in Canada where you came from. If you went back to Canada and spoke about that government the way you speak about ours, the Canadians would throw your ass in jail. And so you come to this country and exploit our free speech, right, and our wonderful opportunities to make millions of dollars, and to use the language that you use, and you get mad that people protest you. Well, you're part and parcel of the problem. As far as the dunce of the week goes, as stupid as Samantha Bee is, I got to go with Scarlett Johansson.
I didn't see it coming.
You didn't see it coming. Because if actors can't portray people they're not, then there can be no acting. If Hollywood, and there's a certain silver lining in it for conservatives, right? Because what is the left now saying? The left is now saying that you can't pretend to be something you're not. Now let that sink in. You can't pretend to be something you're not, but you are whatever you say you are. So if I'm a man who says I'm a woman, that's not pretend, despite what my biology and my chromosomes would tell you. When I say I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, when I say I am a man who's a woman, that has to be taken as absolutely authoritative. If I, as a man, however, and an actor, try to play a transgender woman in a movie, then I am violating reality. You understand what the left has done here? It is utter intellectual and logical anarchy. You can pretend to be whatever you want, and we'll tell you are that. When Rachel Dolezal says she's a black woman, many on the left said, well, if that's what she feels like she is, let her be a black woman. But now if Rachel Dolezal was to play a black woman on screen, she would then be a racist. What a stupid, stupid world the left has bequeathed us. Who did you pick for Dunce of the Day?
I did not pick Scarlett Johansson. I went with Alexandria from The Block.
What's up with that? Look at the stare on her. Wow.
Yeah, that's her. And I picked her because I think there's a lot more danger in having her around. She is being looked at by the left and by millennials as this up-and-coming rising star. And if you actually invest in what she's saying and taking her at face value, I think she doesn't know anything. And if she is actually elected, which she has a good shot at being in New York's 14th, she's going to be put into office. And yes, she won't get anything done. And Republicans are already saying, like, sorry, sister, this is not going to happen. We're not going to listen to you. But mainstream public and mainstream media are listening to her. And the more encouragement that she gets by not being called out for her stuff, the more she's going to rise. And it's going to be dangerous for everyone.
It's also legitimizing stupid.
Yeah.
Right? It's legitimizing stupid. I still go with Scarlett Johansson. I think epistemologically, I think existentially, the extension of that argument is just as dangerous for the left as it is for the right. That you can pretend to be whatever you want, and that has to be taken seriously. You just can't pretend it in ways they don't like.
All right. Well, if you liked what you saw in today's episode, make sure to leave us some comments, give us some good feedback, and head over to YouTube to watch us again. And if you want to, you can always listen to us on SoundCloud and iTunes. Up next, we have Charlie Kirk with Talking Points.
Time now for our Talking Point segment with Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA. Charlie, I'm old enough to remember when the Soviet Union still existed and people like Ted Kennedy, Democrats, were sneaking over to the Soviet Union to do diplomacy behind the back of President Reagan. I remember when all of this kind of crazy stuff, Bernie Sanders went and honeymooned in the Soviet Empire at the height of the Cold War. And now, because Donald Trump has the temerity to stand toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin, the whole world's coming to an end. Talk a little bit about what's going on with diplomacy.
Yeah, and the word they kept on using was traitor and treasonous. How horrific. I don't remember any of those words being used when Barack Obama gave Iran a path to a nuclear weapon and hundreds of millions of dollars in cash on a private jet without telling anyone in the middle of the night going to Tehran. I don't remember the word treason being used when Hillary Clinton sold 20% of our uranium in exchange for cash, which, by the way, Bill Clinton gave a speech in Russia while Hillary was Secretary of State and got $500,000 from a Russia state-owned finance company. Now, I've heard Bill Clinton speak before. He's not worth $500,000 for 20 minutes. That's pure pay to play. And look, the president has been historically rough and tough on Russia, and this is not getting reported in the media, and I wish he would even talk about it more. He's closed down a record number of Russian consulates in America. He's kicked out Russian ambassadors and Russian citizens. He defied Putin's direct wishes and demands twice when executing airstrikes in Syria. In fact, over 200 Russians were killed when these airstrikes happened in Syria. Not that that's a good thing, but that did not happen under Barack Obama. President Trump refuses to recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. Not to mention, President Trump has slapped on a record number of sanctions against Russia. And finally, he has armed the people of Ukraine with deadly weaponry, and he has stood with the people of Ukraine in their fight for sovereignty against Russian aggression. So you put all that together, all of a sudden you're saying, well, the president is pretty tough and rough on Russia. And I would venture a guess, knowing the president as a patriot and a problem solver, he wanted to have that discussion privately with Putin, not publicly to embarrass him, because war is a terrible, terrible thing. I don't think we want to devolve into that. And President Trump's leadership here has been very commendable, and the media's overreaction has been atrocious.
I'm glad you brought up the word treason. It's amazing. I suppose if there's one silver lining to this controversy, it's the fact that Democrats and social progressives now recognize there is such a thing as treason. You mentioned some examples, but Bo Bergdahl, who actually deserted from his own troops, wandered over to the enemy and sympathized with them, was brought back to America by Barack Obama, paying the mullahs of Iran millions and millions and millions of dollars to bring him back. And he was let off without even a slap on the wrist, didn't spend one day in jail for his desertion. But it's nice to know that the American left now has rediscovered the word treason. You talk about what happened with Trump in Russia. The other thing that bothers me about this, Charlie, is they assume because Donald Trump has a photo op with Putin that Trump isn't smart enough behind the scenes to reserve judgment. The idea that it's the preconceived idea that bothers me, that Trump is so stupid and so inexperienced that he's being played by Putin, when in reality, it seems to me Trump's doing a pretty good job of manipulating Putin for his advantage.
Totally. And look, so the insinuation here and the subtext is that Trump is an idiot or Trump is corrupt, one of two. Can't be both, so it's unusual that they try to put those two together. But these are people that have still not accepted the election results of a duly elected president. And they do not want, I mean, if President Trump brokered peace with Russia, they would say, why aren't we at war? If President Trump fired missiles, they said, why don't we have peace? If President Trump did meet with Putin, they would say, what is he afraid of? Why won't he meet with him? Is he bought and paid for by him? And when he meets with him, they say, oh my goodness, he must be bought and paid for. President Trump has to just do what is the correct thing, which he is doing, and not worry about any of the media chatter or potential repercussions from doing the proper and correct thing on the world stage.
Yeah, all the furor in London, too, has overshadowed two important summits, right? What he did with NATO and what he did in England. Let's talk about those two diplomatic embassies and how successful they were. Start with NATO. I mean, he basically got NATO countries to commit to spending more money on their national defense, something Barack Obama kind of bandied about but never put any pressure on. Trump has succeeded in doing it.
Over $50 billion, I think he got for NATO, which is another thing. I mean, Putin hates NATO, so he's getting NATO more money. He's funding NATO. I mean, give me a break. He's giving NATO a record amount of funding and support. And this idea that he's somehow a Russian sympathizer or agent just does not stand up to the facts of the matter. And so it's rather comical to me. But kind of going back to how he handled NATO, he handled it terrifically. And by the way, he called out Angela Merkel for having a Russian natural gas pipeline into Germany. He said, hey, we're happy to sell it to you. We're your friends. We got plenty of natural gas. And they're going in the wrong direction. They wrongfully shut down all their nuclear plants a couple of years ago, which has made them now very reliant on Russian energy. And so here's a Germany's part of NATO. They're worried about Russian aggression, yet they're buying energy from Russia to help fund their military buildup. And so, look, the president did wonderful in England. He did wonderful in NATO, and he stood up for American interests, both financially and also strengthened NATO, which is an important alliance. But everyone has to pay up, and they have to participate. And so far, it's been America just footing the bill.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the president for telling the NATO nations, look, we'll partner with you to protect yourselves, but we're not going to protect you exclusively. And you think about the media's disinterest in the fact of what you pointed out. I mean, pretty much all of Western Europe now has become dependent on Russia for much of its energy needs. And yet it's America who has no such ties. We are not dependent on Russian oil or gas in any way, shape, or form. In fact, if our trade with Russia stopped tomorrow, we wouldn't miss a beat. It would absolutely cripple European nations. And yet, who's got the real controversy here? And yet, Trump, not only did he call out the NATO nations for not paying their fair share, he got them to double down on it. And when you think about the reception of Trump in London, let's talk about that. Mayor Khan, the incivility, some of the stupidity, the fact that some of these young, goofy, social progressive the young monarchy refused to meet with Donald Trump. In spite of all of that, in spite of crowds of protesters that were much smaller when we actually saw their pictures than the news reported, the summit in London was a tremendous success.
It was a huge success. And I mean, here's Mayor Khan, who says he supports free speech, and then I must allow them to protest. Meanwhile, Tommy Robinson is rotting in jail. So yeah, that really works out well. But look, the people of Britain and the people of Europe, they can protest, they can complain, they can try to disrupt, but at the baseline of all this, they understand, and they don't want to admit it, but I think deep down they know it, that America is still the leader of the free world. And it's not up to anyone except America to dictate the direction of Europe and the way that, the geopolitical kind of climate will continue.
I thought it was a wonderful mark of leadership when the president, in a moment of honest sincerity, told Prime Minister May, look, you have got to follow through on the wishes of the British people. Brexit is a reality. It was voted for. And if you can't get the bureaucrats and the bureaucrats of your country and the EU to agree to this separation, maybe you ought to sue them. I thought that was just shockingly frank and really good advice and really inspiring advice that President Trump felt confident enough to stand with the British people in this move.
I totally agree with that. And look, I mean, Britain made a very bold decision to execute Brexit, and there's now bureaucrats and deep state actors that are trying to prevent this from actually happening. And so I stand with the true people of Britain that want to see this happen. And I mean, look, the European Union is a total bureaucratic socialist disaster and mess. Each country should dictate their future in Europe, not Brussels. And I think that has been a growing difficulty and problem. And I very much hope that Britain will fulfill the people's demands when it comes to this.
One of the things that's bothered me for a long time, Charlie, is how entitled the progressive left is to international diplomacy. They believe they're the only ones smart enough, they're the smartest people in the room, they're the only ones that should be allowed to talk to foreign dignitaries. And yet we've seen basically 10 to 12 years of unabated progressive foreign policy. And I can't think of a single accomplishment. The mullahs continue to build nuclear weapons despite all the money we sent them. The Middle East is falling to pieces. I can't think of any success they've had in the international stage. Why in the world would we trust them and the media that abets them in reporting these things accurately?
That's exactly right. And so look, but you know who I do trust is the president, who has had successful foreign policy decision after successful foreign policy decision. They said, don't do airstrikes in Syria. It's going to start war. That didn't happen. He's abolished ISIS. We're closer to peace ever with North Korea. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He canceled the terrible Iranian nuclear deal. And so the benefit of the doubt should go in the direction of the president. He has made the world a safer place. He has made America stronger. He has made our role more clear and decisive and declared in a foreign policy climate where the world is looking for a leader. And I think our greatest foreign adversary is not Russia. It is China. China is the great enemy of the West. They are growing at a rapid pace economically, militarily. They're the world's second biggest military. They're building islands in the South China Sea. They attack us through cyber daily and with very little to no repercussions. They're absolutely killing us on trade, stealing our IP. And if we do nothing to thwart the rise of the Chinese empire, which is really what it is, not to mention the ports of entry, the natural mineral access that they're buying up in sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Central America, and all throughout Southeast Asia. They're trying to create a 100-year plan of the Chinese empire. This is the true threat to the West. They do not have any respect for the individual. Russia pales in comparison to the power of China. Russia is 130 million people. China is 1.2 billion. It's not even close to the same sort of threat. And I think this entire Russia fiasco, if you will, is a distraction. They are not necessarily our friend. They are not our greatest adversary at all. Radical Islamic theocratic fascism and China are the two biggest threats to America.
I think that's absolutely correct. And of course, the media refuses to talk about the fact that despite the dog and pony show yesterday, today Putin has come forth and said he is willing to help the Americans with the North Korean situation, which is a wonderful piece of leverage against what you just said, the fact that the Chinese are very sketchy about what they actually will allow Donald Trump to accomplish in North Korea. So he's playing geopolitical politics on a global level. The American media and leftist politicians are playing it solely for their own political advantage.
Without a doubt. And if we do not recognize the threat of China, of what they will do to the United States and what they will do to our kind of future and kind of how we will exist in the 21st century, my generation is going to have to encounter that. And I mean, if you look at countries that have actually attacked the United States in the last 100 years, I mean, Russia, they put forth some bots and maybe they tried to corrupt some servers here and there. China actually executes true cybersecurity threats against the U.S. China is rapidly building up the U.S. military in defiance of the Pacific Rim. If you want to talk countries that actually attack the United States, how about Saudi Arabia that pulled off 9/11? They financed, planned, and knew about 9/11. Yet for whatever reason, the people that have horribly screwed up our foreign policy over the last 30 years are the same people that are now screaming that we should be more fierce with Russia. These are the people that wanted to go to war with Iraq instead of penalizing Saudi Arabia. These are the people that have made the horrible mistake of the decisions in the Middle East. They're the same people that have created ISIS with the withdrawal of ISIS. We shouldn't have invaded Iraq, but we shouldn't have withdrawn the way we did either. And yet these are the same people that are now acting like experts with the Russian issue. And I think President Trump takes it issue by issue, matter by matter. And look, there's no mistake. I'm not trying to say Russia is an ally, but Russia, we've had a very complicated, at times helpful relationship with them. We partnered with Russia to defeat Nazism in the 1940s. When the Soviet Union fell, we opened up trade with Russia, and we still buy lots of products and goods and services from them, and vice versa. So I think it's a big mistake to try to just immediately think we have to do saber rattling all the time, especially when the great enemies are China and other countries that have wished us harm throughout the last 20 or 30 years.
And let's stop pretending that standing face to face with a foreign dignitary, even one with questionable moral and political values, is in itself a sign of corruption on our side. Here's to draining the diplomatic swamp as well. Charlie Kirk, my friend, it's always a great pleasure talking to you, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
You're doing a great job, seriously. Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.